So understanding buyer representation agreements, the BRA. Some parts of this are fairly dry. I'll warn you in advance, but it is, a contract that hopefully some of you are familiar with, if not totally familiar with, and we're going to go through it pretty carefully here and have a look at what it says. What does a buyer representation agreement actually say? So before we get started too far, in TRREB Forms Explained, and you can see the screenshot that I have on the right-hand side. At the top, it says, "You are here." I had to do this off my phone, but if you follow this path from Home, MLS Info, Forms and Clauses, Forms Explained, you will get to a section in the Toronto Real Estate Board that has each paragraph of not only the buyer representation agreement, but just about every, I'll say, mostly used documents. So it's got an agreement of purchase and sale, it's got a condo sale, freehold sale, buyer rep agreements, customer service agreements. It's got about 20 or 25 different contracts that what they've done is they've left the pre-printed portion in black ink, and then there's a portion in red ink that explains the paragraph. It's always a good idea to have this. You can save these, you can print these, you can email them the format and give to your clients before the offer. They can read the explanations themselves, and then you can ask, do you have any questions about the document before they sign it? And so it's a great thing. When I was selling real estate, this didn't exist, this Forms Explained. If I was selling real estate today, I think I'd keep a copy of the most common forms in my briefcase so that if I ran into a buyer or a seller, that I could say to them, well, here's a copy, here's what's explaining, here's what it says. Please have a chance to read it over, and then we can go through the document together, or if you have any questions, I'll answer them. It'll save you time for sure. It's a great thing that the Toronto Real Estate Board has. I did forget to mention at the beginning of this, sorry, I'm just going to back up a little bit. If you all just mute yourself until you need to talk, that would be great. Also, if you have questions, don't hesitate to jump in, or comments, don't hesitate to jump in. I do try to do the chat window as chats come up, so don't hesitate to use the chat window as well. So yes, so the TRREB Forms Explained is a really, really great product that will help your clients understand not just the BRA, but just about the most important documents that they'll be getting themselves into. Electronic signatures. This is a real problem. It's a real problem in the GTA today. We run into it all the time when we are defending people or going after people at RICO or TRREB, that the client says, I never knew what I was signing. It was never explained to me properly. That's a real problem in the world today, in the real estate. So when you're using Authentisign to get things signed, the best practice is email all the documents to the buyer or seller, doesn't matter, in advance, and include in the email, I will be calling you to explain the document. Now you could actually download the TRREB document that has all the explanations on it and say, I'll still be calling you to explain the document, but that might help. And then phone the buyer and explain the documents. Don't rush through it. Keep a record of your phone log so that if a buyer ever comes around and says, nobody explained it to me, then you have the email that says, I'll be calling you to explain the document. And then you have your phone record that you explained the document to the buyer, so that they can't say it was never explained to me in case something goes terribly wrong in the deal or whatever. Once you've explained the documents to the buyer, then send the Authentisign version for initials and signatures. Okay? It's a real lack of professionalism in the industry today. People are just simply saying, just sign here and here. And here's an in-person example of the wrong way to get buyers to sign a document. Let's just listen to this for a moment. So, Mrs. Buyer, I'm really happy that you've decided to make an offer on this property. Could I please have your initials here, here, and at the bottom of this page, I need your signature here and your signature here. Here's the agreement. Can you please initial at the bottom of this page, the bottom of this page, assign here please at the top, and the bottom of this page as well. This is the confirmation of cooperation. Would you please initial here, sign here, thank you, and then last but not least, that you're not including some conditions. If you would please initial here and sign here. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'll send this off to the listing agent and I'll get back to you as soon as I have an answer. Thanks. Okay, you guys. I know I know for a fact that this is what's happening in the real world. Okay, it's not the right way to do things, obviously. Most of you people I see on the list here, you guys buy cars, you do all sorts of things. Do you get into these contracts without reading them or having somebody explain them to you? Don't expect that you should assume that your buyer or seller, but I'm going to talk about buyers, you shouldn't be doing this like this. And I know it happens all the time. And if you take a look at that, this is exactly what's happening when you send it via Authentisign. You just send it over to them. You don't explain it to them. Just click start, go click on the initials, click on the signatures, click on finish signing, and I'll have it back and I'll let you know how the offer goes. And we know that this is happening all the time. Hopefully none of you guys are going to do it, but you never know. Oops, sorry, that's me doing this. So the BRA. The beginning of the BRA is really straightforward. You cover the names, the dates, and explain about the 6-month initials if required. Then you go on to say property type residential, geographic location, and you put down whatever I just put down whatever here. Okay, you can put down the York regions. You do have to be careful about putting down GTA. The reason why is GTA is actually not a provincial or municipal defined border. It is simply a geographical defined border. And technically, it's not quite right to put it in. What you should do is include all the Simcoe and York regions and Durham and Halton and the city of Toronto, Mississauga, all that for the GTA. We have been told by our broker of record from Isabel that GTA is not an acceptable form. I know it's being used all the time, but you really should try to avoid that. And then on the BRA, of course, is one of the most important lines of all. You must explain to the buyer that they will be requiring to initial in the circle stating they are not a party to another BRA with another brokerage. Okay, this could really save you in the long run. Buyers will look up and go, oh, well, geez, I did sign something a little while ago. I'm not sure what it was. Of course, I'm assuming that you've asked the buyer the 3 most important questions when working with a buyer, and that is, have you worked with another realtor? Have you signed anything in writing? And the third one is, have you put an offer in on a property before? If they've put an offer in on a property before, you know that they've signed a BRA, because a BRA should be signed always prior to an agreement of purchase and sale being signed. And so if somebody says they put an offer on a property before, your next question is when. And if it's 5 years ago, that's a little different. But a lot of buyers today, what they're doing is they are going out and looking at 5, 6, 7, 8 properties, trying 5, 6, 7, 8 offers, losing every one. And then they switch buyers, switch agents because they're upset at you, the agent, for not being able to get them a house. This happens frequently. And so it's really important that you ask them, have they signed an offer before? And then it's your responsibility to track down the other agent and find out if they still have a valid BRA. section 1, definitions and interpretations. But before we start into this, I want to say that the explanations at the bottom of each slide are my own words. I did not take this from the Toronto Real Estate Board website where the forms explained. I've done this myself. You guys should probably come up with your own explanations. I mean, you can use mine if you want, but it maybe doesn't fit your own style. And so I'm not saying that the explanation is something that you have to use exactly verbatim, but you should develop your own explanations. And the way I was taught when I was first becoming a realtor many years ago, my broker of record made us read the paragraph, the whole paragraph, and then write out a sentence. And here it is. So a buyer, the explanation for definitions and interpretations, we've taken this whole paragraph and we put it into simply one sentence. A buyer is defined as immediate heirs, spouse, executors, etc., plus any affiliated corporation where the buyer has control of the corporation. Now that's important. The buyer has control of the corporation. They may be the majority shareholder, which is a wonderful thing, but hey, you might be a minority shareholder, but the buyer has control of the corporation, okay? A good example of that is Bell Canada. The people who control the corporation for Bell Canada, I think only own about 8% of Bell shares, but they have control of the corporation. They can do whatever the hell they want for Bell Canada. So you do want to point that out, okay? And that whole paragraph here, a buyer is defined as immediate heirs, spouse, executors. This is really important because if Mr. Buyer is signing the agreement and there's a Mrs. Buyer is tied to this agreement as well. Okay, so that she can't just go out. So you need to explain this. Commission, part 1. So there's 5 parts in the commission section, okay? Commission part 1, it's a long paragraph, but simply the first paragraph, which is at the bottom of page 1, it's that the buyer agrees that the brokerage is entitled to commission. That is not hard to say to a buyer. It's really, really, really easy to say to a buyer, as opposed to perhaps the next couple of paragraphs. The second paragraph. Commission, you've all seen this part where you put in 2.5%. The buyer agrees to pay this amount, usually 2.5%. If there is a difference, the buyer agrees to pay the difference. And if there is no commission payable, David, I think it was your question. If there's no commission payable, the buyer agrees to pay the commission. That's what this says. So if you have them under a buyer representation agreement and they go direct to a builder, and the builder says we don't pay commission, the buyer is responsible to pay the commission, okay? In fact, what it says also in here is it says that if the MLS commission given, doesn't actually say MLS, but it says if the commission is less than what is stated, so you put 2.5% here, and the MLS pays 2.25%, technically the buyer is responsible to pay that 0.25% difference. Now, in all my years, I've never seen anybody do that. I've never seen 2.5 here, 2.25 on the MLS data sheet. I've never seen anybody go after the buyer for 0.25. I mean, I think you would pretty much wreck your relationship with the buyer kind of right away. But certainly if it's a builder situation and you've got 2.5% down here and they go direct to the builder, to get back to that question, yes, the buyer should be paying you this. But guess what the buyer will say? Well, you didn't explain that to me. So you better explain this to them so that they understand that they can't go behind your back. It also applies that if they go out and buy a house privately, so they go by and they see a private for sale sign, or they find a place on Kijiji or something like that, and they go and buy a house. Well, you've got your 2.5 here. You are eligible for that 2.5 unless you have not explained this to the buyer. Any questions? All right.
I have a question, John.
Sure.
It's come up quite a few times, but I do this verbally. But I've had maybe two people challenge or insist, is probably a better word, insist that I put it in writing that if the MLS says, for example, 2%, and I've put 2.5%, even though I've noted or per MLS, they still require that comfort of knowing that I will not go after the remaining balance. Is there any clause I can put in, or is that done through an email, or should I be insisting that this document speaks for itself as long as I put 2.5, and then on the second line I'd state per the MLS?
Right. So if they're really concerned about that, it's a good question. You can see after all the dots that the paragraph starts, it says the buyer agrees to pay directly to the brokerage any deficiency between this amount and the amount of any to be paid to the brokerage by a listing brokerage or by the seller. If you have somebody who's really insisting that they don't want to do that, cross out that line and have everybody initial. Nicola?
But by doing so, I am not securing myself again in the event that they go to a builder.
Oh, that's true too.
Or a personal
yeah.
sale. So what I'm saying is, Don, I want to keep that as is. I'm completely okay with not having them have to pay the difference in a transaction that they are, doing with myself. No problem. 1% less, no problem. However, I'm not okay with being in agreement with you and you going off purchasing a private sale or, like you said, through a builder.
Right. So the thing is that you don't have to put 2.5 commission down.
Okay.
I know in when I was selling a few times, and it doesn't happen very often, just like you've experienced, I've put 1.5% down.
But does that not shortchange you in the event that they go directly to a builder or
a seller,
privately, right?
It does.
So Nicola never puts down anything but 2.5. Just wondering if there's something that you could advise to make those two clients that I've had in 10 years that wanted to feel secured that I wasn't going to go after them in the same transaction that they came along with me.
Yeah, I understand what you're asking. I'd have to think of the wording that you could put in here, because you have 2.5% of the sale price or the property, or and I'm sure we could come up with some wording to put in there, Nicola, but off the top of my head, I can't think of it.
Okay, no problem. No problem. I actually made that system up myself, so I thought maybe I'd put that forth and see if you completely objected to it, but you didn't. So
no, not at all. Not at all. You can put down what you want. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, John.
Okay, no, it's a good point. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. The third paragraph, this is the holdover period. If we show the buyer a property, the buyer may not deal directly with the seller until the expiration of this agreement and the holdover period. Now, before we go on to the next sentence, you'll see that it says, if we show the buyer a property. What the wording actually says, introducing the buyer to a property, which could just simply be a for sale sign, but it really doesn't hold up well. It's basically what you've shown the buyer, okay? Here's the killer line. This does not apply if the buyer signs with another brokerage after the expiration of this agreement. So you have a buyer representation agreement that ends on, well, today. What is it? December 14th today, okay? You've shown the buyer all sorts of places. The buyer then on December 15th goes out and signs a new buyer representation agreement and buys one of the houses that you showed first. You're out of luck, I'm afraid to say. Okay, it's not a very nice part about this, but it's in there. Okay. The fourth paragraph in the commissions. This is really simple. If the buyer defaults, then commission is still payable. And you should look the buyer in the eye and say, you know, if you default for any reason that's your own fault, going down the road, that's not the seller's fault, it's not the agent's fault, it's not the home inspector's fault, it's not the lawyer's fault, it's the buyer's fault, and it's a default, and you're not going to close the deal, you are still, as the agent, the brokerage, is still eligible for their commission. And the fifth paragraph, if the buyer rents a place instead, this agreement still covers for a sale. Now, so what does that mean? That means in the commission section of the agreement, you can actually put down 2.5%. And then in the lease section, you can put down half a month's rent. And so you can actually put both down there and it still covers, you're still covered. So if they rent a place instead, this agreement still covers for a sale, okay? And vice versa, by the way. If you're in for a sale and then they do a lease, then you are still covered, but you have to have a commission amount down for both of them. And that's the commission section. That's not hard. That's 5 sentences to explain it. It's not difficult to do, but a lot of people don't do it because they don't understand it. Representation. This is where a lot of people get upset at us at our brokerage because we are making them fill out a working with a realtor brochure, form 810, I believe it is, 810. So this is, the red part is not what is highlighted in the actual buyer representation agreement, but I've underlined it so that we really are clear. The buyer acknowledges that the brokerage has provided the buyer with written information explaining agency relationships, including information on seller representation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is the working with the realtor, form 810, that we're insisting that you guys do, I should say. So we lost a case in front of the Toronto Real Estate Board when the buyer representation agreement was signed on such and such a date, and the working with a realtor was signed afterwards. And the Toronto Real Estate Board did not look favorably upon the agent because it's supposed to be done first, okay? So what I always tell the new agents that join is when you first meet your client, give them the working with the realtor brochure, ask them to read it and tell them, if we come to the point where we find a house that you'd like to purchase, I'm going to need you to sign and initial this. So please read it over carefully. And if you have any questions, please let me know. That's the way I always did it at the beginning of every new client that I had. So they got it right off the bat and they had it. The buyer agrees that we've explained agency relationships. As well, the buyer agrees that we may not find them the perfect property. Okay, so they can't really come back to you and say, well, I don't know, you haven't found me the perfect property, we want to sue you. You know, they can't do that. Okay, so that's really important that the buyer understands that the working with the realtor has to be signed first and that we may not find them the perfect property. So you're going to try your best. Well, in today's world with hardly any inventory, it's difficult to find perfect properties, isn't it? Multiple representation. The buyer agrees and understands that the brokerage may represent 2 clients, but in this case, we cannot disclose anything about the seller, including price, motivation, or any terms in the offer, and we cannot receive notices on behalf of the client. So what does that mean? In the agreement of purchase and sale on page 2 is where you can enter fax numbers or phone numbers and emails for the purposes of receiving notices. And in a multiple representation situation, you're not allowed to do that. And those notices in general, 99.9% of the time, is that the agent can acknowledge receipt of a notice of fulfillment or a waiver, as an example. And does not need a client signature, but in a multiple representation situation, you're not allowed to do that. All that wonderful stuff in here, that's what it says. Multiple representation in customer service. The buyer agrees that the brokerage may work with other buyers, but in this case, once again, we can't disclose anything about either client, including price, motivation, or any terms in the offer. However, you must disclose concrete property information that may influence a buyer's decision to purchase the property or what price. Basically, what they're talking about here to a large extent is if we are in a multiple representation situation, latent defects have to be told. I mean, you know, I think we all know that latent defects must be told. The referral of properties, I love this one. The referral of properties, the buyer agrees that if they find a property that they have to tell the brokerage. And if they do not, and they buy a property without the agent, then commission as stated above is payable. And so back to the commission part, I think it was David's question, I think, once again, it says it right there, okay? Payable within 5 days following the brokerage's written demand therefore, okay? I think I missed an E at the end of therefore there, but anyways. What happens is that buyers naturally, and I'm sure we've all done this, you know, you've got the agent's working hard, but what happens at the end of the day? The buyer goes home, goes to realtor.ca, or maybe you have them on Collaborate, I don't know, and says, wow, how come John didn't show me this place? And look at this place is the perfect place. And so you really do want to talk to them about referral of properties, that if they find a place, that you have to tell us that you're interested in seeing it, all right? If you don't tell them this, and this is right out of another TRREB case that we split the commission 50-50, because the buyer had gone out, found another property, had gone to another, our brokerage didn't show that property, they didn't understand referral of properties, it was never explained to them, and as a result, our agent lost 50% of the commission. And so you want to explain this to them. Real life examples there, you guys. Any questions?
I didn't get this part. Can I say something? That if my buyer finds a property and they go and visit it with another person, this is how it is, or by the seller agent?
Yeah, well, they just might. Yeah. I mean, you haven't told them that if you go onto realtor.ca and you find a property that you think you'd like to see, you have to tell me. Well, you have to tell us, whatever, right? Okay. Yeah. They just, you know, because some people think, well, you know, John didn't offer this place to be shown. I wonder why not? Let's go see it with somebody else.
Oh, okay, I understand.
Okay. Indemnification. The buyer brokerage is not responsible for the condition of the property. All right. Home inspections. Okay. The last sentence, the buyer acknowledges having been advised to make their own inquiries to confirm the condition of the property. All right. The buyer brokerage is not responsible for the condition of the property. You have to tell the buyer that. All right. We are not experts in this. Okay. If we know of anything, we have to tell you, especially if it's a latent defect, but we are not responsible for the condition of the property. And indemnifying basically means you can't sue us because of the condition of the property. Indemnification is a fancy word for you can't sue me. Okay. Finder's fees. The buyer agrees that the brokerage may collect finder's fees. Okay. A finder fee. What happens there? It's pretty rare, I have to admit, but sometimes mortgage agents will offer the agent, mortgage agents will offer you guys a referral fee. And basically you're supposed to have that paid through the brokerage because you're not supposed to receive any other monies. And it can be collected in addition to the commission as described above. It's pretty rare, okay? But finder's fees, where when I first started out, they were huge. And then as I sold real estate for years and years, finder's fees went kind of south and haven't seen them for a while now. So hopefully that's not happening too much. Consumer reports, self-explanatory. The buyer is hereby notified that a consumer report containing credit and or personal information may be referred to in connection with this transaction. Now for a lease, that's pretty obvious, okay? But what about a buyer of a property? And I have been put to task on this why would a seller want my credit information? And my explanation for that is only if a vendor take-back mortgage is happening, that if the seller is holding a mortgage for you, Mr. Buyer, they have the right to get a credit report on you. Any questions about that?
I have a question. It's not directly about that, but I just, sometimes maybe we need to verify if the buyer is really serious or something. I had an offer for my listing 3 weeks ago. The guy called me on Sunday afternoon around 3 o'clock, 4, and said he's going to bring an offer. He brought the offer around 4 o'clock, and I asked him to give an extension. He like not a longer irrevocable. The next day, my client wanted to say, I called him and asked for a check prior my client signed. He said, you already have it. Anyway, he never brought a deposit. We accept the offer. He didn't bring the deposit. It looked too phony to me. So my point is, maybe we as a seller, broker, maybe sometimes we need to verify validity of the buyer.
Well, sure. I mean, you are allowed, you could ask that other agent to get a consumer report because you have them under a buyer representation agreement. I'm not so sure that the seller has the right to do that right away. I think there has to be an exchange of information there, such as a driver's license number or something like that. But yeah, the answer to that, just like you did, Paula, insist that the deposit check is herewith instead of upon acceptance. We want it herewith. You've got it. Give it to me. Otherwise, I'm not interested in looking at your offer. Simple.
Yeah, but my point, he brought it in Sunday afternoon. Yes, we had the next day, but by the time that everything was going to finalize, we didn't have enough time, and they said we don't have enough time to go and get it.
Yeah, no, I know. The weekends are tough for that, for sure. I understand.
Yeah.
What can you do?
Yeah.
It happens.
But we have right to ask for their credit or something. Am I right?
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you can ask. They can say no, but you can ask, sure. Okay.
Thanks.
So the use and distribution of information, this is a really simple one. These are the rules under the Privacy Act. We can only share information with people directly involved in a transaction. Buyer's information can be shared with a lawyer. It can be shared with a home inspector, if necessary, the bank, that kind of thing. What I used to say is, we can only share information with people directly involved in a transaction. I'm not allowed to take your name and personal information and sell it to a third party. Okay, that's basically the bottom line. Excuse me. Conflict or discrepancy. Anything added to this agreement supersedes the pre-printed portion of this agreement. So most buyer representation agreements do not have a Schedule A or B or whatever. Most don't. They're very, very rare that you have a schedule on a buyer representation agreement. But if you do, it's the same as the agreement of purchase and sale. Anything in a schedule overwrites the pre-printed portion of the agreement. Successors and assigns. If the buyer passes away, the heirs, etc., are still bound by this agreement. So this can be pretty nasty. I mean, let's face it. I've had to cross this line out when I've done some sales that the buyer has said, no, my heirs are not going to be tied to this agreement if they want to buy a house with somebody else if I pass away. And I kind of can't blame them, really. It's kind of weird, but that's what it says. Paragraphs 11 and 12. Anush, you have a question?
Yes, about the other one. So can they cross it out and they say that's not going to happen? Like, are they allowed to do that?
Cross it out and initial it, sure. You'd have to initial it as well.
Yeah, that is just me that I'm buying the house. Nobody else is involved. Like, I mean, nobody else responsible for this deal.
No, this is if the buyer passes away.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's-
Like, if I don't
Right.
exist, nobody
Yeah.
else is responsible. Okay, so they can
Right.
legally do that.
Yeah, in this case here, you're bound, the buyer passes away, the heirs, et cetera, are still bound by this agreement, okay? There's also a successors and assigns clause in an agreement of purchase and sale that it says if the buyer passes away, the heirs are still bound by this agreement. Oh my goodness, that makes it a little more trickier on that side. This one here, you're just letting them go from the agreement of buyer representation agreement. That's not so bad, but in an agreement of purchase and sale, it's a much trickier thing. Okay.
Can they cross it out in the agreement of purchase and sale?
I'm going to be careful answering that one. I've never seen it. I would think you'd want to ask a lawyer that question. Okay. I'm not so sure that I want to answer that question, to be honest with you, Banush. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Good question, though. Electronic communication and electronic signatures. Pretty straightforward. The buyer consents the electronic signatures are valid and confirms that the buyer has received a copy. So when you have sent them electronically a copy and they have signed it via AuthentiSign or DocuSign or whatever you're using, they are agreeing that they have a copy. Another good reason why the certificate of authentication is really important, because then it proves when it was sent and that you have proof that they have it. Okay. Buyer representation agreement. So if you remember the first lovely video I did, which is about half of the way all the GTA agents are doing it, just initial here, sign here, initial here, sign here, initial here, initial here. Now I'm going to show you the right. Here we go. Hi, everybody. I just want to point out right now that it is 17 minutes after 2. I am here to explain to you how you can explain a buyer representation agreement to a buyer. So here goes. Hi, Mrs. Buyer. I'm really glad you've decided to work with our brokerage today. I'd like to go over the buyer representation agreement with you. The agreement is between the brokerage and yourself. Got your address and your phone number down here, and it's commencing today and it's ending in 60 days from now. The next line down from the time and dates of when it starts and when it ends is for more than 6 months, which this agreement is not more than 6 months, so I do not require an initial from you. We're going to try to find you a residential unit, that's the property type, in the geographic location for York and Simcoe. The next line underneath that says that the buyer hereby warrants that the buyer is not a party to another buyer representation agreement. And I ask you to initial in that circle that you have not signed a buyer representation agreement with another brokerage. The first paragraph is definitions and interpretations. This paragraph explains who a buyer is and who a seller is. In this case, we're more concerned with yourself, the buyer. The buyer includes yourself, your spouse, your immediate heirs, administrators, and executors. Plus, if you have control of a corporation, 50% or more, or you have authorization to control a corporation, it is also tied to this buyer representation agreement. The next section is section 2. It's the commission section, and it's got 4 or 5 paragraphs. The first paragraph at the bottom of page 1 states that you agree that we are allowed to collect commissions from the sale of this property. It's how we feed our families, and so that's how we get paid, is by getting commissions. At the top of page 2, it states the commission amount that we're eligible for, and it's 2.5%. What this means is that if you go outside of this agreement, Mrs. Buyer, if you go outside of this agreement and work privately with somebody, we are still entitled to that 2.5%. If you decide at the end of this agreement to go back to a property that we have shown you, and deal directly with the seller, we are still entitled to this agreement,
and that's the holdover clause in this next paragraph. You cannot deal directly with the seller until after the holdover clause has expired. It goes on to say that we may not actually find you the property that you want to purchase. You cannot hold us responsible if we can't find you your dream home. Obviously, I'm going to try my best to find you your dream home, but it's not always possible, especially in today's market where there's a very lack of inventory. It may be hard to find you the exact home that you're looking for. Last but not least, in the commission section, this buyer representation agreement, it states on the first page that it's an authority for purchase or lease. If you decide through the currency of this agreement that you want to lease, that's fine, there's no problem at all, but it does not relieve you from this agreement if you purchase a property even after you lease throughout the length of this agreement. The next section is 3, is representation. The first line of paragraph 3 says that the brokerage has given you written information explaining agency relationships. And if you remember correctly, when we first met, I gave you the brochure that explained the difference between a client and a customer. If you have any questions about that, now's the time to ask. No questions? Wonderful. The next paragraph in the representation agreement is that we may not be able to show you every property that you want to see. We're going to do our darndest, but hey, some properties sell really, really fast and we may not get there in time. You can't hold us responsible in those kind of scenarios. The next section is multiple representation. You agree that the brokerage can work with 2 clients at the same time. In other words, we're representing 2 people, a buyer and a seller, that have signed representation agreements and are clients. However, in a multiple representation situation, there's some very strict rules. We're not allowed to reveal what a buyer herself may want to pay for a property. We are not allowed to reveal what a seller may accept for a property, the price they may accept. We're not allowed to reveal the motivation of the buyer or the seller, why the buyer is buying or why the seller is selling. And we're not allowed to reveal the contents of any other offer to anybody in a multiple offer situation. The next section is multiple representation and customer service. You're agreeing that the brokerage is allowed to work with other buyers for the same property. Of course, if that's the case, then the brokerage must reveal any relevant property information that may affect your decision to purchase the property. Last but not least, in this section, it states that under multiple representation, we're not allowed to receive notices if you're in a multiple representation situation, which means that we cannot sign documents on your behalf. Paragraph 4, the referral of properties, and this is very common, is that you're going to go home this evening, you're going to go onto realtor.ca and look at all sorts of houses, and you're going to say, geez, how come John didn't show me this house, or how come John didn't show me that house? Well, right now in the GTA, there's about 9,000 homes available, so we're doing the best we can to show you the ones that you want to see. But if you see a house that you would like to go and view, then you have to refer that property to me. We work together as a team, and so the referral of properties, I'm more than willing to show it to you, but you're agreeing that you'll tell me which ones that you may want to see in case I've missed something. The next page at the top is indemnification. Indemnification means that you cannot hold myself or the brokerage responsible for the overall condition of the property. We are not experts in homes in terms of the quality of the homes. That's why we recommend you get a home inspection. If you move into a house and something goes wrong with it, you cannot hold us responsible for that. The next section is finder's fees. The brokerage is allowed to receive finder's fees, and finder's fees may be that if we recommend you to a mortgage broker, perhaps the mortgage broker pays the finder's fee. We have to tell you that in writing. After that is consumer reports. This is more specifically for a lease, but if you're doing a lease, the landlord has the right to obtain a consumer report report on you. Or if a seller is willing to hold a mortgage, the seller is able to get a consumer report on you to make sure that you have the ability to pay whatever the mortgage amounts are. Following that is the Use and Distribution of Information Act, paragraph, and that is the Privacy Act. Any information that we gain from you can only be spread in relation to this transaction. I can't sell your name to a third party or to an email address place. I can't give your phone number out to people, all that kind of stuff. The only things that I can do is give your name to a lawyer, perhaps to a home inspector, anything related to a transaction. That's it. Number 9 is conflict or discrepancy. If there was a schedule added to this agreement, and there is not, then the schedule would override the pre-printed portion, so it does not apply in this case. Next is section 10 is Successors and Assigns. The heirs, executors, and administrators of your estate are bound by this agreement should you have an agreement to purchase and for some horrible reason you pass away. The heirs and executors are bound by this agreement. The next 2 are electronic communication and electronic signatures. You're agreeing that we can use emails or faxes to send documents back and forth, and we can use electronic signatures as a form of legal signatures in this transaction. As you can see, the next one is schedules, and there aren't any, which means that number 9, conflict or discrepancy, does not matter anymore. And last but not least, near the bottom of the page is a declaration of insurance that I have errors and omissions insurance in case I make some kind of a mistake along the way. Now, Mrs. Byer, I know I've gone through that relatively quickly. Do you have any questions? No? How wonderful. Would you please initial here and at the bottom of page 1 as well. Initial here at the bottom of page 2. Sign here and date with your phone number. And at the bottom, if you would please sign and date, and I will give you a copy of this immediately, because at the bottom it says that I've given you a copy. Thank you very much, Mrs. Byer. Now, it is now 2:27. That took me exactly 10 minutes to explain to a buyer. If you folks out there who just listened to me take 10 minutes of your life, explain a buyer representation agreement to your clients properly, then you will stay out of RICO jail. And I highly recommend that you learn this just like I've learned it. Thanks. Bye now.
Okay, so that take, that movie, well, that video, whatever, I did that in one take. It had to, I've done this many, many times in my previous selling life, but not in the last almost 6 years. So I did have to practice a little bit. I did have to read a little bit. And then it kind of came back to me. Practice makes perfect. That's 10 minutes, guys, to do something like that. 10 minutes is probably a good thing to invest your time in to do that,
Thank you so much for watching. If you like our video, please hit the like button, the subscribe, and even the little bell to get notifications, just so you can stay in touch and watch more of these great videos.